My sister raised her glass at our father's funeral and said, "I've been waiting for this day my whole life." The priest had just finished speaking when my sister Noreen started laughing. Not a quiet laugh. Not a nervous laugh that sometimes happens at funerals when grief does strange things to people. This was a real laugh. A happy laugh. The kind of laugh you hear at birthday parties and weddings. She was standing next to our father's casket in a red dress because she said black was too sad, and she didn't feel sad. I had asked her that morning to please wear something appropriate. She told me I wasn't the boss of her. Our father had died 3 days earlier from a stroke. He was 74 years old and had been healthy until the moment he wasn't. I found him on the kitchen floor of his house when I came to check on him like I did every Sunday. Noreen hadn't visited him in 2 years. She lived 40 minutes away and said the drive was too long. She said Dad was boring anyway. She said old people depressed her. But here she was at his funeral, laughing next to his body like she had just heard the funniest joke of her life. Our Aunt Francine, who was Dad's sister, asked Noreen what was so funny. Noreen wiped tears from her eyes and said she was just so relieved. She said she had been waiting for this day her whole life. She said now she could finally get what she deserved. Aunt Francine looked at me with horror on her face. I shook my head because I didn't have an explanation. Noreen had always been difficult, but this was something else entirely. After the service, we went to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Our father had been a careful man who planned everything in advance. He had told me years ago that his will was updated and clear, and there would be no confusion when the time came. I believed him because Dad was not a man who left loose ends. The lawyer, whose name was Mr. Feldman, opened the folder and started reading. He explained that our father's estate consisted of his house, which was paid off and worth around $300,000. His savings, which totaled about $80,000. His car, which was old but functional. And a storage unit that contained furniture and personal items. Noreen was leaning forward in her chair with her eyes bright like a child waiting to open presents on Christmas morning. Mr. Feldman continued reading. Our father had left everything to me. The house, the savings, the car, the storage unit, everything. Noreen's name was mentioned once. She was to receive our grandmother's china set, which was in the storage unit. That was it. A set of dishes. Noreen didn't move. She sat there frozen while Mr. Feldman finished reading and asked if we had any questions. Then she exploded. She stood up so fast her chair fell over. She said this was wrong. She said there had to be a mistake. She said our father would never cut her out like this. She said I must have manipulated him. She said I must have poisoned him against her. She demanded to see proof that this was the real will. Mr. Feldman calmly showed her the document with our father's signature, witnessed and notarized 2 years ago. At the same time, Noreen stopped visiting. At the same time, she told our father that she didn't have time for him anymore. At the same time, she said his house smelled like old people, and she couldn't stand being there. Our father had changed his will after that conversation. Mr. Feldman said there was also a letter. He said our father had written something to explain his decision. He handed me an envelope with my name on it. I opened it and read it out loud because Noreen was screaming that she had a right to know what it said. The letter was short. It said that our father loved both his daughters, but love and inheritance were different things. It said I had been there for him every week for the past 15 years. It said I had driven him to doctor's appointments, helped him with his bills, and sat with him when he was lonely. It said Noreen had told him 2 years ago that she was just waiting for him to die so she could have his money. She had said it to his face during an argument about why she never visited. She probably didn't remember saying it. But he remembered. He wrote that he was giving his estate to the daughter who wanted him, and not the daughter who wanted his money. Noreen grabbed the letter from my hands and read it again like the words would change if she stared at them hard enough. Then she tore it up. Mr. Feldman pressed a button on his desk phone and asked his assistant to call building security. Noreen was still holding the torn pieces of Dad's letter in her hands. She looked at them like she couldn't believe what she had just done. Then she looked at me and her face changed from shocked to angry. She started screaming that I was a manipulator. She said I had isolated Dad from his real family. She said I had spent 15 years poisoning him against her. She called me a conniving snake who pretended to care about an old man just to steal his money. I sat frozen in my chair. My hands were shaking. I wanted to defend myself, but no words would come out. Mr. Feldman stood up and walked around his desk. He positioned himself between Noreen and me. He told her in a calm voice that destroying the letter changed nothing. He said he had copies in his files. He said the original was also on file with the court. Noreen threw the torn pieces at him. They scattered across his desk and onto the floor. She said she didn't care about copies. She said the will was fake. She said I had forged Dad's signature. She said Dad would never do this to her. A security guard appeared in the doorway. He was a large man in a dark uniform. Mr. Feldman asked him to escort Noreen from the building. The guard stepped forward. Noreen backed away from him. She said she wasn't leaving until she got answers. She said she had a right to be there. Mr. Feldman explained that she had received the information from the will reading, and now she needed to leave. He said if she refused, he would call the police. Noreen looked at me again. Her eyes were red and wet. For a second, I thought she might cry. But instead, she screamed that I hadn't heard the last of this. She said she was getting a lawyer. She said she would prove Dad wasn't in his right mind when he changed the will. She said everyone would know what I had done. Tony had been sitting quietly in the corner during all of this. He stood up and touched Noreen's arm. He said they should go. Noreen jerked away from him. She told him not to touch her. She told him he was supposed to be on her side. Tony looked embarrassed. His face was red. He glanced at me and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Then he followed Noreen toward the door. She stopped in the doorway and pointed at me. She said this wasn't over. She said I would pay for what I had done. Then she was gone. The security guard waited a moment to make sure she was really leaving. Then he nodded at Mr. Feldman and left too. The office was suddenly very quiet. Mr. Feldman sat back down at his desk. He picked up the torn pieces of the letter and put them in a folder. He asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if that was true. My chest felt tight. My hands were still shaking. Mr. Feldman said will contests were common in cases like this. He said people often got emotional when inheritance didn't match their expectations. He said this particular case had very clear documentation in my favor. He explained that Dad's will was properly witnessed and notarized. He said the letter explaining Dad's reasoning was dated and signed. He said there was a clear timeline showing that Dad changed his will 2 years ago, when he was obviously healthy and competent. Mr. Feldman told me that Noreen would have a hard time proving undue influence or lack of capacity. He said I should expect her to hire a lawyer and file a formal contest. He said I would need legal representation too. He gave me the names of 3 attorneys who handled estate disputes. I took the paper he handed me, but I couldn't focus on the words. Everything felt unreal. 3 hours ago, I had been at my father's funeral. Now I was sitting in a lawyer's office being accused of manipulating and stealing from him. Mr. Feldman walked me to the elevator. He said to call him if I had any questions. He said not to worry too much because the case was strongly in my favor. The elevator doors closed and I was alone. I drove to my apartment without really paying attention to the road. I kept seeing Noreen's face when Mr. Feldman read the will. I kept hearing her voice calling me a snake. I parked in my usual spot and sat in the car for 10 minutes. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I pulled out my phone and called Fiona. She was my best friend since college. She answered on the second ring. I asked if she could come over. She heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. She just said she would be there in 20 minutes with wine and food. I went inside and sat on my couch. I stared at the wall. I thought about Dad lying in his casket in his good suit. I thought about how I would never see him again. And I thought about how Noreen had laughed at his funeral. The knock on my door came exactly 20 minutes later. Fiona had Chinese takeout and 2 bottles of wine. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I started crying. I couldn't stop. She led me to the couch and sat next to me. She didn't say anything. She just held my hand while I cried. When I finally calmed down enough to talk, I told her everything. I told her about the will reading. I told her about Dad's letter. I told her about Noreen tearing it up and screaming at me. I told her about the accusations and the threats. Fiona listened without interrupting. When I finished, she poured wine into 2 glasses. She handed me one and said Noreen was out of her mind. She said I had spent every Sunday with Dad for 15 years. She said I had driven him to doctor appointments and helped him pay his bills. She said I had sat with him when he was lonely. She said Noreen couldn't be bothered to drive 40 minutes to visit. She said of course Dad left me the estate. She said I earned it by being a good daughter. I drank my wine and felt a little bit better. Fiona opened the containers of food. We ate sitting on my couch. She told me funny stories about her kids to distract me. It worked for a little while. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about Noreen's face when she heard the will. She had looked genuinely shocked, like she really believed Dad would leave her half of everything, like she thought her absence for 2 years wouldn't matter. Part of me felt good that Dad had recognized my care and loyalty. He had seen that I showed up week after week. He had valued that. He had made sure I would be taken care of. But another part of me felt sick. Money and possessions were destroying what was left of our family. We had just buried our father. We should have been grieving together. We should have been supporting each other. Instead, we were fighting over his house and his savings. Instead, Noreen was accusing me of manipulation and theft. I thought about when we were kids. Noreen and I used to be close. We shared a room until she was 12. We played together in the backyard. We told each other secrets. I couldn't remember when things changed between us. There was no single moment, just a slow growing apart. Different friends, different interests, different values. By the time we were adults, we barely spoke except at family gatherings. And even those became less frequent after she got married. I rolled over and looked at my clock. It was 3 a.m. I had to work tomorrow. I closed my eyes and tried to think about something else. Anything else. But Noreen's voice kept echoing in my head. You're a conniving snake. You isolated him. You poisoned him against me. I finally fell asleep around 4:30. My phone woke me at 7:15. I had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I had 7 text messages from relatives I barely talked to. Cousins I saw once a year at Christmas. An uncle who lived in another state. All of them wanted to know what happened at the will reading. All of them had heard from Noreen that something was wrong. I deleted the messages without responding. I got in the shower and stood under the hot water until it started to run cold. I got dressed for work, but I couldn't focus on anything. My phone rang again. This time it was Aunt Francine. I answered. She said Noreen had shown up at her house the night before. She said Noreen had been crying and upset. She said Noreen was claiming I had brainwashed Dad against her. Aunt Francine asked me what really happened. I explained everything. I told her about Dad's letter. I told her what it said about Noreen's words 2 years ago. I told her about Noreen saying she was just waiting for Dad to die so she could have his money. Aunt Francine went quiet on the other end of the line. Then she said she remembered that argument. She said she had been at Dad's house that day. She said she heard Noreen say those exact words. She said Dad had been so hurt. She said he didn't talk about it much after that, but she could tell it changed something in him. Aunt Francine said she loved both of us, but she couldn't support Noreen trying to overturn Dad's clearly stated wishes. She said if it came to it, she would testify about what she witnessed. I thanked her. I felt a little less alone. At least someone understood. At least someone knew I wasn't lying or manipulating the situation. 3 days passed. I went to work. I came home. I avoided my phone. More relatives called and texted. I ignored most of them. The ones I did talk to seemed to be taking sides. Some believed Noreen's version where I was a scheming daughter who had stolen her inheritance. Others believed me. The family was splitting apart. On Thursday afternoon, I got home from work to find a large envelope in my mailbox. It was from a law firm I had never heard of. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a formal letter stating that the firm represented Noreen in the matter of our father's estate. The letter said they were contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I read the legal language twice. It essentially accused me of manipulating my elderly father. It said I had isolated him from his family. It said I had used my position as his caregiver to control his decisions. It said Dad had not been mentally competent when he changed his will. I sat down on my couch because my legs felt weak. I read the letter again. Each word felt like an attack. I called Mr. Feldman. His assistant put me through right away. He said he had expected this. He asked if I had an attorney yet. I said no. He reminded me about the list of names he had given me. He said I needed to hire someone soon because Noreen's lawyers would start filing motions. He said not to panic because the case was still strongly in my favor. But I was panicking. I was sued by my own sister. I was accused of abusing my father. I felt sick to my stomach. Fiona came over that night. I showed her the letter from Noreen's lawyers. She read it and got angry. She said Noreen had some nerve. She said accusing me of elder abuse was disgusting. She said her husband Jung was an attorney who handled estate disputes. She said she would ask him to look at my case. I said I couldn't afford a lawyer right now. Fiona waved that away. She said Jung would review the situation as a favor. She said we could figure out payment later if I decided to hire him. She called Jung right then. She explained what was happening. She asked if he could meet with me tomorrow. He must have said yes because she smiled and gave me a thumbs up. She told me to come to their house after work. She said Jung would look at all the documents and tell me what I was dealing with. I felt grateful. At least I had someone on my side who knew what they were doing. At least I wasn't facing this alone. Fiona stayed until late. We watched stupid reality TV shows and didn't talk about the will or Noreen or any of it. When she left, I felt a little bit better. But as soon as I was alone again, the anxiety came back. I lay in bed and worried about legal fees. I worried about what people were saying about me. I worried about facing Noreen in court. I worried about strangers picking apart my relationship with Dad and judging whether I had been a good daughter or a manipulative one. I went to Fiona and Jung's house after work on Friday. Jung had set up all the documents on his dining room table. I had brought copies of Dad's will. I had brought the letter Dad wrote. I had brought the timeline Mr. Feldman had given me showing when Dad changed his will. Jung read through everything carefully. He asked me questions about my relationship with Dad. He asked about Noreen's relationship with Dad. He asked about the argument 2 years ago. He asked if anyone else had witnessed it besides Aunt Francine. I told him about other family members who had been around during that time. He took notes. After about an hour, he sat back in his chair. He said Noreen's case was extremely weak. He said Dad had clearly been competent when he updated the will 2 years ago. He said there was no evidence of mental decline or confusion. He said the letter Dad wrote explained his reasoning in his own words. He said undue influence was very hard to prove when the person making the will had legitimate reasons for their choices. He said Dad's letter showed those reasons explicitly. Jung explained that Noreen would have to prove I had isolated Dad or controlled his decisions. He said the fact that other family members visited Dad and could testify about his mental state would work against her claims. He said the timeline was also in my favor because Dad changed his will 2 years before he died. He said that showed planning and deliberation. He said courts didn't like to overturn clear wills unless there was strong evidence of problems. I asked what would happen next. Jung said Noreen's lawyers would file a formal petition with the probate court. He said there would be discovery where both sides requested documents and information. He said there might be depositions. He said eventually there would be a hearing where a judge would decide if the will should stand. He said the whole process could take months. He asked if I wanted him to represent me. I said yes. I asked about his fees. He said he would give me a family discount because of Fiona. He said we could work out a payment plan. I felt relieved. At least now I had someone who knew what they were doing on my side. I had to go to Dad's house on Saturday to start sorting through his belongings. I had been putting it off. I didn't want to face his empty house. But Mr. Feldman said the estate needed to be inventoried. He said I needed to start the process of figuring out what to keep and what to sell or donate. I drove to Dad's house in the morning. I parked in the driveway where I had parked every Sunday for 15 years. I sat in my car for a few minutes. I looked at the house. It was a small ranch style with blue siding. Dad had lived there for 30 years. He had raised Noreen and me in that house. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. I used my key. The house smelled like Dad, like his coffee and his aftershave and the wood polish he used on the furniture. Everything was exactly how he had left it. His reading glasses on the side table, his newspaper folded on the couch, his coffee mug in the sink from the morning of his stroke. I walked through the rooms slowly. The living room where we used to watch TV together. The kitchen where he taught me to make his mother's soup recipe. His bedroom where I had found him that last Sunday. I sat down on his couch. The same couch where I had sat every week while we talked about his doctor appointments and his garden and what was happening in the neighborhood. I started crying. I cried harder than I had at the funeral. I cried because Dad was gone. I cried because I would never sit on this couch with him again. I cried because I would give back every penny of the inheritance to have him here. I cried because Noreen was making this about money when we should be grieving together. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I got up and started going through Dad's things. Aunt Francine showed up around noon. She knocked on the door and came in carrying 2 sandwiches and bottles of water. She said she knew I wouldn't be taking care of myself. She said she wanted to check on me. We sat at Dad's kitchen table and ate lunch. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the truth. I said I was overwhelmed. I said I was angry at Noreen. I said I was sad about Dad. I said I felt guilty for being angry when I should just be sad. Aunt Francine patted my hand. She said all my feelings were normal. She said grief was complicated. She said family conflict made it even more complicated. She told me that she had talked to other family members about the argument 2 years ago. She said several people remembered Noreen saying horrible things to Dad. She said one cousin remembered Noreen calling Dad a burden. She said another aunt remembered Noreen complaining that Dad expected too much from his children. Aunt Francine said she loved both Noreen and me. She said we were both her nieces. But she said she couldn't support Noreen trying to overturn Dad's clearly stated wishes. She said if it came to testifying, she would tell the truth about what she witnessed. She said other family members felt the same way. I felt better knowing I had support. Aunt Francine helped me start sorting through Dad's closet. We packed his clothes in boxes to donate. We found old photos in his dresser drawers. We found cards and letters I had sent him over the years. He had kept all of them. Aunt Francine left around 3. She hugged me and told me to call if I needed anything. I kept working until it got dark. Then I locked up the house and drove home. On Sunday morning, I got a thick package from Noreen's lawyers. Inside were discovery requests. They wanted 15 years of my financial records. They wanted my phone logs. They wanted documentation of every interaction I had with Dad. They wanted copies of every check I had written him or he had written me. They wanted my calendar entries. They wanted statements from my bank accounts. The list went on for pages. I called Jong even though it was Sunday. He said this was normal. He said it was a fishing expedition. He said Noreen's lawyers were trying to find any evidence of undue influence. He said they were looking for large financial transactions or suspicious patterns. He said they probably wouldn't find anything, but we had to respond to the requests. He said it would take time to gather everything. I spent the rest of Sunday and all of Monday evening going through my files. I printed bank statements going back 15 years. I found old calendars where I had marked my Sunday visits to Dad. I found receipts for groceries I had bought for him when he couldn't get to the store. I found paperwork from the times I had driven him to the hospital or to specialist appointments. I made copies of everything. I put it all in folders organized by year. It felt invasive. It felt insulting. These lawyers were going through my private financial information looking for evidence that I was a bad person. Looking for proof that I had manipulated my father. But Jung said we had to cooperate. He said the discovery process went both ways. He said we would be requesting information from Noreen too. He said we would ask for evidence of her visits to Dad. He said we would ask for phone records showing how often she called him. He said we would ask for any financial support she provided. He said when we showed the contrast between my involvement and her absence, it would strengthen our case. I finished organizing the documents late Monday night. I had stacks of paper showing 15 years of being a good daughter, 15 years of showing up, 15 years of caring. I hoped it would be enough. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and sleepless nights. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sorting through more of Dad's documents. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but the area code was local. I answered and heard a young voice that sounded nervous and uncertain. She said her name was Maya, and she was Noreen's daughter. I hadn't seen Maya since she was maybe 6 years old at a family barbecue where Noreen had left early because she said the bugs were annoying her. Maya said she knew her mom was really mad at me, but she wanted to call anyway. She said she was sorry about Grandpa dying. Her voice cracked a little when she said it. I told her thank you and asked how she was doing. Maya said she was okay, but she felt weird about everything happening. She said she wished she had known Grandpa better. She said her mom always told her he was boring and there was no point visiting him because old people just sat around and didn't do anything interesting. I felt a sharp pain in my chest hearing that. I told Maya that Grandpa wasn't boring at all. I told her he loved gardening and he could identify every bird that came to his feeder. And I told her he made the best pancakes and he knew every constellation in the sky. Maya was quiet for a moment and then she said she didn't know any of that. We talked for another 20 minutes about Dad and what he was like. Maya asked questions about his hobbies and his favorite foods and what made him laugh. I answered everything honestly and tried not to cry while I talked about him. Before we hung up, Maya said she was glad she called and asked if it would be okay to talk again sometime. I said yes, of course, and gave her my number to save. After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone and thinking about how Noreen had stolen those 15 years, not just from Dad, but from her own daughter too. The next day, I met with Jong at his office to go over the discovery responses that Noreen's lawyer had finally sent. Jong's office was in a tall building downtown with big windows that looked out over the city. He had papers spread across his desk and his reading glasses perched on his nose. He gestured for me to sit down, and then he started going through the documents. Jong said that Noreen's financial situation was apparently desperate based on what her lawyer was arguing in the response. He showed me bank statements that her lawyer had included as evidence of financial hardship. Noreen and Tony were behind on their mortgage by 3 months. They had credit card debt totaling over $40,000. Their car was about to be repossessed. Jong pointed to a section where Noreen's lawyer argued that she was clearly counting on inheritance money to solve these problems, and that my father must have known about her financial situation. I asked if that helped her case or hurt it. Jung leaned back in his chair and said it actually helped our case significantly. He explained that it showed her motivation for contesting the will wasn't about Dad's wishes or any real belief that he wasn't competent. Her motivation was purely about her own financial needs. Jung said judges don't like it when people try to overturn clear wills just because they're in debt. He said it made her look opportunistic rather than genuinely concerned about Dad's mental state when he changed the will. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness looking at those numbers. Relief that our legal position was stronger, but sadness that Noreen's life had gotten so out of control that she was this desperate. Fiona called me on Thursday and said I needed to take a break from all the estate stress. She said I looked terrible the last time she saw me and I needed to get out of my apartment. I tried to tell her I had too much to do, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. She picked me up and drove us to our favorite coffee shop on the east side of town. It was a small place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. We ordered our usual drinks and found a table near the window. Fiona was telling me about some drama at her work when I saw Tony walk in. He was Noreen's husband, and I hadn't seen him since the funeral. Tony looked uncomfortable when he spotted me. He hesitated near the door like he was thinking about leaving. Then he walked over to our table. He said he didn't want to interrupt, but he wanted to say something if that was okay. Fiona looked at me and I nodded. Tony pulled out a chair and sat down. He said he wanted to apologize for how Noreen had been acting. He said he knew the funeral was awful, and the legal fight was making everything worse. Tony looked tired and older than I remembered. He explained that they were in real financial trouble, and Noreen had convinced herself that Dad would leave them enough money to get out of debt. He said she had been counting on that inheritance for the past 2 years. He said when she found out Dad left everything to me, she completely fell apart. Tony said he understood why Dad made the choice he did. He said he had tried to get Noreen to visit Dad more often, but she always had an excuse. He said he knew that didn't excuse her behavior at the funeral or the legal fight, but he wanted me to know that she was desperate and scared rather than just mean. I didn't know what to say to that. Tony finished his coffee quickly and said he needed to go. He squeezed my hand before he left and said he was sorry for everything. That conversation with Tony stayed with me for days. I kept thinking about the difference between understanding why someone does something and agreeing with how they do it. I understood financial desperation. I had been broke plenty of times in my life, but I had never treated people badly because of it. I called Jong and asked if there was any way to settle this without a full legal battle. I said maybe I could offer Noreen some money to make her go away, and we could all move on. Jong was quiet for a moment, and then he asked how much I was thinking. I said maybe $30,000 or $40,000. Enough to help with her immediate crisis, but not half the estate. Jong said I could do that if I wanted to, but he had to warn me about something. He said giving in to a baseless will contest set a bad precedent. He said it told Noreen and anyone else watching that if you make enough noise and cause enough trouble, you can get money even when you don't deserve it. Jong reminded me that Dad specifically didn't want Noreen to have the money. He said Dad's letter was very clear about his reasoning. Jong asked if I really wanted to ignore Dad's clearly stated wishes just to avoid conflict. I told him I needed to think about it. He said that was fine, but I should think carefully about what I was really doing. He said I would be rewarding Noreen for 2 years of neglect, and for tearing up Dad's letter, and for accusing me of elder abuse. He said that didn't seem right or fair. I hung up feeling more conflicted than before. That night I went back to Dad's house because I had left some boxes there. The house felt different every time I visited. More empty, more like a place where someone used to live instead of a home. I found a stack of photo albums in the hall closet that I hadn't noticed before. I sat down on the living room floor and started looking through them. The oldest album had pictures of Noreen and me as kids. There was one of us building a sandcastle at the beach. We were maybe 5 and 7 years old, and we were both grinning at the camera with sand in our hair. There was another picture of us dressed up for Halloween. Noreen was a princess, and I was a witch. We had our arms around each other. I kept flipping through the pages and watching us grow up in these frozen moments. We used to play together every day. We used to share secrets and protect each other from the neighborhood bullies. We had matching bikes and we rode them everywhere. I tried to figure out when everything changed between us. There wasn't a single moment I could point to. It was gradual. Noreen started caring more about being popular in middle school. She got new friends who thought I was boring. By high school, we barely talked, even though we lived in the same house. After she got married and moved out, we saw each other maybe twice a year at family events. We became different people with different values. I wanted stability, and she wanted excitement. I showed up for family, and she showed up for herself. Looking at these old pictures, I felt sad for those 2 little girls who didn't know they would end up fighting over their father's money someday. And 3 weeks after our last court appearance, Noreen's lawyer filed a motion for expedited hearing. Jong called me to explain what that meant. He said Noreen's lawyer was claiming financial hardship and asking the judge to move up the trial date because they couldn't wait 4 months. Jong said this was ridiculous because Noreen's money problems weren't the court's concern. He said the court schedule existed for a reason, and you couldn't just jump the line because you were in debt. But we still had to appear before the judge to respond to the motion. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I took the day off work and met Jong at the courthouse. The building was old with marble floors and high ceilings that made everything echo. No. We went through security and found the right courtroom. Noreen was already there with her lawyer. She didn't look at me. The judge came in and everyone stood up. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She asked Noreen's lawyer to explain the motion. He stood up and gave a speech about how Noreen was facing foreclosure and couldn't afford to wait months for a trial. He said the delay was causing irreparable harm to his client. The judge listened without expression. Then she asked Jong to respond. Jung stood up and calmly explained that Noreen's financial problems existed before our father died, and weren't caused by the will. He said she had been in debt for years according to her own financial disclosures. He said the court schedule was set for a reason, and financial hardship wasn't grounds for expedited hearing when the hardship predated the case. The judge looked at Noreen's lawyer and asked if he had any response. He tried to argue that Noreen's situation was urgent, but the judge cut him off. She said she had reviewed the will and Dad's letter and the timeline of events. She said Noreen's claims seemed weak based on the evidence. She denied the motion for expedited hearing and set a trial date 4 months away if we couldn't reach a settlement. The gavel came down and it was over in less than 20 minutes. After the hearing, Jong and I walked out into the courthouse hallway. I was feeling relieved that the judge seemed skeptical of Noreen's case. Then I heard Noreen's voice behind us. She was calling my name. I turned around and saw her walking toward me. Jung immediately stepped between us and said all communication needed to go through attorneys. Noreen ignored him and kept talking to me directly. She yelled that I was hiding behind lawyers because I knew what I did was wrong. She said I manipulated Dad, and now I was too scared to face her without legal protection. Something inside me snapped. I stepped around Jung and spoke up for the first time since this whole thing started. I told Noreen that I was there every single week for 15 years while she couldn't be bothered to call. I said Dad made his choice based on our actions, not my manipulation. I said she told him to his face that she was waiting for him to die so she could have his money, and now she was mad that he remembered. Noreen's face turned red. She started to say something, but her lawyer grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Jung put his hand on my shoulder and guided me toward the exit. My hands were shaking. I had never confronted Noreen like that before. I had always been the peacekeeper who avoided conflict. But something about her blaming me for her own choices made me angry enough to finally push back. That confrontation left me shaking and upset for days afterward. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. I kept replaying the moment in the courthouse hallway over and over in my head. I hated conflict. I had spent my whole life trying to keep peace in the family. I never wanted to fight with my sister over our father's money. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. So Fiona came over one evening and found me sitting on my couch staring at nothing. She made me tea and sat down next to me. She said I looked terrible and asked what was wrong. I told her about the confrontation and how awful it made me feel. Fiona listened, and then she said something that hit me hard. She reminded me that I didn't start this fight. She said Noreen started it by laughing at Dad's funeral and contesting a clear will and accusing me of elder abuse. She said I had done nothing wrong except be a good daughter for 15 years. She said Noreen made her own choices and now she was dealing with the consequences. Fiona asked why I was taking responsibility for Noreen's feelings when Noreen never took responsibility for anything. I knew she was right, but it still felt awful to be estranged from my only sibling right after losing our father. I told Fiona that part of me kept hoping Noreen would apologize and we could find some way back to being family. Fiona said maybe that would happen someday, but right now I needed to protect myself and honor Dad's wishes. She said being kind didn't mean letting people walk all over me. The estate lawyer called the next week and said I needed to make a decision about Dad's house. He explained that it was expensive to maintain an empty property. The utilities were still running. The lawn needed mowing. The house was just sitting there while the estate remained unsettled. He said if the will contest dragged on for months, the costs would add up. I met with a real estate agent that Jong recommended. Her name was Sandra, and she had been selling houses in the area for 20 years. So Sandra walked through Dad's house with me and took notes. She said the market was good right now, and the house should sell quickly for close to the appraised value of $300,000. She said buyers loved the neighborhood and the schools were excellent. But the thought of selling Dad's house to strangers made me feel like I was erasing the last physical connection to him. I told Sandra I needed time to think about it. She said that was fine, but the longer I waited, the more carrying costs would eat into the estate value. After she left, I sat in Dad's living room and looked around at all his things. His favorite chair where he used to read the newspaper, the bookshelf he built himself, the photos on the mantle. How could I let strangers live here and change everything and make it not his anymore? I knew that wasn't rational. Dad was gone and the house was just a building. But it didn't feel that way sitting there surrounded by his life. My phone rang on Saturday morning and I saw Maya's name on the screen. I answered and she asked if she could come see Grandpa's house before anything happened to it. She said she had some memories from when she was little and she wanted to see it one more time. I agreed immediately and gave her the address even though she probably still remembered it. Maya showed up an hour later with her hair in a ponytail and wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. She looked so much like Noreen at that age that it hurt to look at her. We walked through the house together and Maya moved slowly through each room. She stopped in the kitchen and said she remembered helping Grandpa bake cookies here. She said he let her crack the eggs and she always made a mess, but he never got mad. She pointed to a spot on the counter where she had spilled flour everywhere. In the living room, she said she remembered sitting on his lap while he read her stories. She said he did funny voices for all the characters. We went out to the backyard and Maya walked straight to the garden. She knelt down next to the tomato plants that were still growing. She said Grandpa taught her how to plant seeds and water them. She said they grew sunflowers one summer that were taller than her. Maya looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said she wished she had visited more. She said her mom always made excuses about why they couldn't come, but Maya should have insisted. I sat down on the grass next to her and said she was just a kid, and it wasn't her responsibility. I said Grandpa understood that. Maya wiped her eyes and said she felt like she missed out on knowing him. I told her she could ask me anything she wanted to know, and I would tell her stories about him. We sat in the garden for another hour while I shared memories and Maya listened. It was bittersweet watching her try to connect with the grandfather she barely knew. I realized that Noreen's actions hadn't just hurt Dad and me, they had hurt her own daughter's relationship with our family too. I watched Maya walk to her car and pull out of the driveway. She waved once before turning the corner and disappearing from view. I stood there for a few minutes looking at the empty street. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Maya sent while she was still driving away. It said she was sorry for what her mom said, and that she needed time to think about everything. I texted back that I understood, and that she could call me anytime. I went back inside Dad's house and locked the door behind me. The garden looked different now that Maya had been there and talked about Grandpa teaching her to plant seeds. I could picture him kneeling in the dirt with a little girl helping him water tomatoes. Those were the moments Noreen had missed by staying away. Those were the memories Maya barely had because her mom decided Dad was boring and not worth visiting. I sat down at the kitchen table where Dad used to read the newspaper every morning. The house felt emptier knowing that Maya was upset and confused because her mom had lied to her. Noreen had told her daughter that the inheritance was supposed to be split equally. She had told Maya that I manipulated Grandpa into changing his will. None of that was true, but Maya had believed it because why wouldn't she trust her own mother? 3 weeks passed without any contact from Noreen. The will contest was still active and Jong kept me updated on the legal filings. Her lawyer sent discovery requests and motions, but nothing moved forward quickly. I went to work and came home and tried not to think about the mess my family had become. Then on a Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Noreen. The message was different from her usual angry accusations. She said we needed to talk in person without lawyers because we were family, and this had gone too far. She said she missed her sister and wanted to find a way to fix things. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it or tell her to go through her attorney like Jong had instructed, but another part of me remembered when we were kids and actually liked each other. I texted back asking where she wanted to meet. She suggested a coffee shop halfway between our houses. Neutral ground. I called Jong to tell him about the meeting and he said it was a bad idea. He warned me that anything I said to Noreen could be used against me in the will contest. He reminded me that she was actively trying to take away my inheritance through legal action. I told him I understood the risks, but I wanted to try talking to her anyway. Maybe we could resolve this without dragging it through court for months. Jong sighed and said if I insisted on meeting her, I should not make any promises or commitments without talking to him first. I agreed. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived on Saturday morning. I ordered a latte and sat at a table near the window. Noreen walked in 10 minutes later wearing jeans and a sweater. She looked tired. She ordered her coffee and sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke for a minute. She stirred sugar into her cup and avoided looking at me. Finally, she said she was sorry for how she acted at the funeral. She admitted she was in shock when she heard the will and she handled it badly. I waited for her to continue. Noreen explained that she and Tony were facing foreclosure on their house. She said they had fallen behind on payments and the bank was threatening to take their home. She needed money desperately to save the house where Maya lived and went to the school. Noreen said she understood now that Dad left me the estate for good reasons. She said she wasn't asking for half anymore. She just needed enough to get out of immediate crisis. Maybe $50,000 to catch up on the mortgage and pay off some credit cards. She looked at me with red eyes and said she knew she had no right to ask, but Maya was going to lose her home if something didn't change soon. I listened to everything she said and felt sympathy despite all the anger and hurt between us. I didn't want Maya to lose her house. I didn't want my niece to suffer because her parents made bad financial decisions. But then Noreen said something that changed how I felt about the whole conversation. She admitted she knew Dad was hurt when she stopped visiting 2 years ago. She said she could tell he was sad and lonely, but she thought he would leave her money anyway because that's what parents do. They take care of their kids no matter what. She still didn't seem to understand that inheritance wasn't automatic. She still didn't get that her words and actions had real consequences. Dad had heard her say she was waiting for him to die, so she could have his money. He remembered that conversation even if she didn't, and he made his will choice based on how his daughters actually treated him, not on some idea of what parents owe their children. I told Noreen I needed time to think about her request. I said I wanted to talk to my attorney before making any decisions about giving her money. She got frustrated immediately. Her face tightened and she put down her coffee cup hard enough that it made a loud noise against the table. She said this was exactly the problem. I had become cold and legalistic when we used to be sisters who helped each other. She said the old me would have just given her the money without lawyers and legal advice. I felt my own anger rising. I pointed out that she didn't help Dad when he needed her. I reminded her that she hadn't reached out to me at all until she wanted money from the estate. Maybe our sisterhood had been one-sided for a long time, and I was just now seeing it clearly. Noreen stood up and grabbed her purse. She said she tried to do this the nice way, but if I wanted to be difficult, she would let her lawyer handle it. She walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I sat there staring at my half-finished latte and feeling sick to my stomach. The meeting with Noreen left me exhausted and confused. I drove home and called Aunt Francine because I needed to talk to someone who knew Dad well and could give me perspective. She invited me over for dinner that night. I showed up at her house with a bottle of wine and she made pasta. We sat in her kitchen and I told her everything that happened at the coffee shop. Aunt Francine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said Dad was hurt deeply by Noreen's rejection. She said he talked to her about it after that argument 2 years ago. Dad had made his will choice after a lot of thought. It wasn't anger or spite. It was sadness. He felt like Noreen only saw him as a source of money, and not as a person worth spending time with. Aunt Francine said I should honor Dad's wishes even though it was hard. Giving Noreen money now wouldn't fix the deeper problems in their relationship or her financial habits. It would just reward her for treating Dad badly, and then demanding money when he died. I asked Aunt Francine if that made me a bad person. She shook her head and said it made me someone who respected what Dad wanted and why he wanted it. On Monday morning, Jung called to tell me that Noreen's lawyer had sent a formal settlement offer. They were requesting $50,000 to drop the will contest. Jung reviewed the paperwork with me over the phone. He pointed out that even if I wanted to give Noreen money, doing it as a settlement would make her baseless legal claims seem valid. Nah, it would look like I was paying her off because she had a legitimate case. Jung suggested a different approach. If I decided to help Noreen financially, it should happen after the will contest was resolved and withdrawn. Then I could give her money as a gift on my terms rather than a legal settlement. That way, I wouldn't be legitimizing her accusations that I manipulated Dad or that his will was invalid. I told Jung I needed a few days to think about everything. He said that was fine, but I shouldn't let Noreen pressure me into making a quick decision. I spent the next Saturday going through Dad's storage unit to catalog everything for the estate. The facility was on the edge of town in a building that smelled like dust and cardboard. I unlocked the unit and pulled up the metal door. Inside were boxes stacked against the walls and furniture covered with old sheets. I started with the boxes closest to the door. The first one I opened was full of cards and letters I had sent Dad over the years. Birthday cards. Thank you notes for Christmas gifts. Letters I wrote when I went to college. He had kept everything. I found photos of us together at different ages. Me as a baby in his arms. Me as a teenager at my high school graduation. Me as an adult at family dinners. There were dozens of pictures documenting our relationship over 15 years. I opened another box looking for cards from Noreen. I found a few obligatory birthday cards with no personal messages. Just her name signed at the bottom. There were almost no photos of Noreen after she got married. Maybe 1 or 2 from holidays where the whole family was together. Seeing the physical evidence of our different relationships with Dad made me feel more confident that his will choice was fair. I had been there. I had showed up. The boxes proved it. I moved deeper into the storage unit and found the grandmother's china set carefully packed in bubble wrap. Each piece was labeled and organized in a large box. On top of the box was a note in Dad's handwriting. It said this was for Noreen from her grandmother who loved her. Even after everything that happened between them, Dad still wanted Noreen to have something meaningful. He could have left her nothing. The will would have been valid either way. But he chose to give her the china because it connected her to family history and to grandmother's memory. I took photos of the china and the note with my phone. I knew Noreen would probably claim I was keeping it from her, even though I had no intention of doing that. I wanted documentation showing that I found it, and that Dad's note was clear about who should receive it. My phone buzzed while I was still at the storage unit. It was a text from Maya asking if we could talk because she was confused about everything happening with her mom and the will. I texted back suggesting lunch the next day. She agreed, and we made plans to meet at a restaurant near her school. I finished cataloging the storage unit and drove home. The next day, I met Maya at the restaurant. She was already sitting in a booth when I arrived. I ordered a sandwich and she ordered a salad. We made small talk about her classes and her friends for a few minutes. Then Maya said she needed to ask me some questions about Grandpa and the will. She said her mom told her one version of events, but after visiting Grandpa's house and talking to me, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I told Maya I would answer her questions honestly, but I would try not to trash talk her mom because that wasn't fair to her. Maya asked why Grandpa left everything to me. I explained about the 15 years of Sunday visits and doctor appointments and helping with bills. I told her about the argument 2 years ago where her mom said she was waiting for Grandpa to die so she could have his money. Maya's face went pale. She asked if that was really true. I showed her a photo on my phone of Dad's letter that he wrote explaining his will choice. Maya read it carefully. She asked why her mom lied and said the inheritance was supposed to be split equally. I said I didn't know why her mom said that. Maybe she believed it should have been split equally, even though Dad decided otherwise. Maya looked angry and hurt. She admitted she was mad at her mom for not visiting Grandpa and for lying about why he changed his will. She said this whole family conflict was making her feel stressed and sad all the time. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I told her none of this was her fault, and she didn't have to take sides or fix anything. Maya nodded, but she still looked upset when we left the restaurant. I drove home from the restaurant and felt my phone buzz before I even got inside my apartment. It was Noreen calling. I stared at her name on the screen and my stomach twisted because I knew Maya must have told her about our lunch. I answered and Noreen started yelling before I could say hello. She said Maya came home upset and told her everything we talked about. She said I had no right to meet with her daughter behind her back. She said I was trying to turn Maya against her and poison her mind with lies about the will. I let her yell for a minute because I knew she needed to get it out. Then I told her that Maya asked to meet with me, and I wasn't going to lie to her when she had questions. Noreen said those weren't my questions to answer, and I should have told Maya to talk to her own mother. I said Maya did try to talk to her, but Noreen kept lying about why Dad changed the will. Noreen went quiet for a second and then said I was twisting everything around. She said Maya was confused and didn't understand adult situations. I told her Maya was 16 years old and smart enough to understand that actions have consequences. I said Grandpa made his own choices based on how we each treated him, and Maya deserved to know the truth about that. Noreen said I was enjoying this and getting some sick satisfaction from making her look bad to her own child. I said I wasn't enjoying any of this, and I wished we could all just grieve Dad without fighting over money. Noreen hung up on me without saying goodbye. The stress from the legal fight started catching up to me over the next few weeks. I wasn't sleeping well because every time I closed my eyes I thought about the next court filing or the next angry phone call from Noreen. I would lie awake at 3 in the morning going over everything in my head and wondering if there was something I could have done differently. My boss noticed I was distracted at work and making small mistakes I normally wouldn't make. I told her I was dealing with family stuff and she was understanding, but I could tell she was worried about my performance. I lost weight because I wasn't eating properly, and I had constant headaches from the stress. Fiona came over one night with takeout and found me sitting on my couch staring at nothing. She sat down next to me and said I needed to talk to someone professional because this was too much to handle alone. I told her I was fine and I just needed to get through the legal process. Fiona said I wasn't fine and she could see this was destroying me from the inside. She said there was no shame in getting help, and actually it was the smart thing to do. I resisted because I felt like I should be strong enough to handle this on my own. I had dealt with Dad's care for 15 years and managed everything without falling apart, so why couldn't I handle this? But Fiona pointed out that caring for Dad was something I chose and wanted to do, while this legal battle was something being forced on me by Noreen's anger and greed. She said those were two completely different situations, and I needed to stop judging myself so harshly. She gave me the name of a therapist her sister had used and told me to at least make one appointment. I finally agreed because I was tired of feeling anxious and sad all the time. I sat in the therapist's waiting room the following week feeling stupid for being there. The therapist was a woman around 50 with kind eyes and a calm voice. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I explained about Dad dying and the will and Noreen contesting it. Then I started crying, which I hadn't expected to do. I told her I felt guilty for being relieved that Dad left me the estate when I should just be sad that he was gone. I said I was also angry at Noreen for making this about money instead of letting us grieve together like sisters should. The therapist listened without interrupting, and then she said both those feelings were completely valid. She said I could honor Dad's wishes and still have compassion for Noreen's situation at the same time. She explained that the inheritance wasn't really about money, but about Dad feeling seen and valued for who he was as a person. He wanted to leave his estate to the daughter who showed up and cared about him, not because he was trying to punish Noreen, but because he was rewarding genuine love and care. That made me cry harder because it was exactly right. Dad didn't change his will out of anger or spite. He changed it because my actions over 15 years showed him he mattered to me, while Noreen's absence showed him she only cared about his money. The therapist said I didn't have to feel bad about accepting what Dad wanted to give me. She said the guilt I felt was normal, but it wasn't serving me or honoring Dad's memory. We talked for the full hour, and by the end I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I made another appointment for the following week. 2 months after the funeral, I got a call from Jung with surprising news. He said Noreen's lawyer had withdrawn from her case. I asked why, and Jung explained that he heard through legal channels that she couldn't pay the retainer fee for going to trial. Estate litigation was expensive, and Noreen apparently didn't have the money to keep fighting. Jung said she was trying to find another attorney, but most estate lawyers wouldn't take a weak will contest case on contingency because the chances of winning were too low. I sat down on my couch and felt a weird mix of relief and sadness. Relief because the legal pressure was finally easing and I wouldn't have to keep preparing for court. But also sadness because Noreen's financial problems were so bad that she couldn't even afford to continue the fight she started. It made me realize how desperate she really was, and how much she had been counting on Dad's money to fix everything. Jung asked if I wanted him to reach out about settling now that she didn't have legal representation. I said no because I wanted to see what Noreen would do next. If she was ready to accept the will, then she needed to be the one to make that move. Jung agreed and said he would wait to hear from her or her new attorney if she found one. 3 days later, I got an email from Noreen sent at 2 a.m. The subject line just said we need to talk. I opened it and found a long message that was part apology and part explanation for everything that happened over the years. Noreen wrote that she was jealous of my close relationship with Dad and always felt like the disappointing daughter who could never measure up to me. She said I was the responsible one and the good one, and she was the screw-up who made bad choices. She wrote that being around Dad reminded her of all her failures and made her feel worse about herself. So she stayed away because it was easier than facing those feelings. Then she convinced herself that Dad didn't really care if she visited or not, and that made it okay to stop coming around. She said she knew that was wrong now, and she should have tried harder to maintain a relationship with him. Noreen admitted she said terrible things to Dad during that argument 2 years ago about waiting for him to die. She said she was angry and stressed about money, and she took it out on him in the worst possible way. She wrote that she didn't blame him for changing the will after that, and she understood why he left everything to me. But she also said she was scared and desperate because they were about to lose their house and she didn't know what else to do. The email ended with her saying she was sorry for how she acted at the funeral and for contesting the will and for all the pain she caused. I read Noreen's email 3 times trying to understand how I felt about it. Part of me was angry because her apology felt like it came only after she couldn't afford to keep fighting. But another part of me finally understood that our different relationships with Dad came from different places of pain and insecurity, not just selfishness on her part. Noreen had spent years feeling like she wasn't good enough, and that pushed her away from Dad while I had spent years feeling needed, and that pulled me closer to him. Neither of us had it completely right or completely wrong. I spent 2 days thinking about how to respond. Then I wrote back acknowledging her feelings but also explaining how much her absence hurt Dad. I told her about the times he would ask if she was coming to visit, and then try to hide his disappointment when I said she was busy. I wrote about how hard it was to watch him hope for a relationship with her that she didn't seem to want. I said I understood she had her own struggles, but Dad had feelings too, and he deserved better than being ignored for 2 years. I ended the email by saying I was willing to talk about moving forward, but she needed to officially withdraw the will contest first. I told her that had to happen before we could have any real conversation about rebuilding our relationship. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Noreen took 2 weeks to respond, and I started to think she wouldn't reply at all. Then I got a short email from her saying she agreed to withdraw the contest and accept Dad's will as written. She didn't apologize for the legal fight or explain why it took her so long to respond. She just said she was done fighting and wanted to move on. It wasn't the warm reconciliation email I might have hoped for, but it was a step toward resolution. I forwarded the email to Jung, and he said he would file the paperwork to officially close the case. He called me later that day to confirm everything was submitted to the court. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for the next legal bomb to drop. The constant anxiety that had been sitting in my chest for months started to ease. I went for a walk that evening and actually enjoyed it instead of spending the whole time worrying about what Noreen would do next. Fiona texted asking how I was doing, and I told her the will contest was over. She sent back about 20 celebration emojis and said we needed to go out for dinner to mark the occasion. With the legal fight resolved, I had to make a real decision about the inheritance. I spent a week thinking about what felt right to me while still honoring what Dad wanted. He left me everything because I was there for him, and because Noreen told him she was just waiting for him to die. Those were his reasons, and they were valid. But I also knew that helping Noreen didn't mean Dad's choice was wrong. I decided to keep the house and most of the savings like Dad intended. But I would give Noreen $20,000 as a gift, not as a settlement. It was enough money to help with her immediate crisis, and maybe keep them from losing their house. But it wasn't enough to completely solve all their financial problems, which she and Tony needed to address themselves. I talked to Jung about the legal way to do this, and he helped me draft a letter making it clear this was my choice and not an obligation. The letter said I was giving her this money because I wanted to help my sister, not because I thought Dad's will was wrong or unfair. Jung said the letter was important to protect me legally in case Noreen ever tried to claim the gift meant something else. I signed everything and arranged for the money to be transferred to her account. I texted Noreen asking if we could meet in person because I had something to tell her. She agreed, and we met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. She looked nervous when she walked in and sat down across from me. I ordered us both coffee, and then I explained my decision about the $20,000. I was very clear that this was my choice to help her, and not an admission that Dad's will was wrong. I said Dad made his decision based on our actions over many years, and I respected that completely. But I also didn't want to see her lose her house or watch Maya suffer because of adult problems. Noreen started crying right there in the coffee shop. She said thank you over and over and reached across the table to grab my hand. For the first time in months, she seemed genuinely humble instead of entitled or angry. She admitted she needed to make major changes in how she and Tony handled money. She said they were already meeting with a financial counselor and working on a real budget. Then Noreen asked if we could try to rebuild some kind of sister relationship, even if it was different from what we had when we were kids. She said she knew she had a lot to prove, and she understood if I didn't trust her right away. I felt myself getting emotional too, because despite everything I still remembered the sister I grew up with before life pulled us in different directions. I told Noreen honestly that I was willing to try, but I needed her to respect boundaries and understand that trust had to be rebuilt slowly over time. And I said I couldn't just forget the past few months and pretend everything was fine. She nodded and said she understood completely. We talked for a while about what rebuilding our relationship might look like. I suggested we start with lunch once a month with no expectations beyond showing up and being civil to each other. No drama and no fighting and no bringing up the will or the money unless it was absolutely necessary. Noreen agreed and said that sounded fair and manageable. We picked a date for our first lunch the following month. When we left the coffee shop, I felt cautiously hopeful that we might eventually find a way to be family again. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation where everything was instantly perfect. But it was realistic and honest, which felt more valuable than pretending the hurt hadn't happened. I drove home thinking about Dad and hoping he would be okay with the choice I made. I believed he would understand because he raised me to be kind, even when it was hard. I called Aunt Francine the next day to tell her about my decision. She listened while I explained the $20,000 gift and why I thought it was the right thing to do. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said Dad would be proud of me. She said I found a way to honor what he wanted while still showing kindness to my sister. She said that's exactly who Dad raised me to be. Someone who could be strong about boundaries, but also have compassion when it mattered. Aunt Francine offered to help if Noreen and I needed someone neutral to talk to during our rebuilding process. She said she loved both of us and wanted our family to heal even if it took time. I thanked her and told her I might take her up on that offer, because having someone who understood both sides could make things easier. We talked for a while longer about Dad and about memories from when Noreen and I were kids. Before we hung up, Aunt Francine reminded me that healing doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen if people are willing to try. 2 weeks later, I drove to Dad's house with boxes and cleaning supplies to start sorting through his belongings. The house had been sitting empty since his death, and walking in felt strange. Everything was exactly where he left it. His reading glasses on the coffee table, his jacket hanging by the door, the calendar still showing the month he died. I stood in the living room for a few minutes just looking around and remembering all the Sundays I spent here. Then I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window and saw Noreen getting out with Maya and Tony. She had texted me the night before asking if she could come help, and I said yes. Now here they were walking up to the front door carrying boxes of their own. I opened the door before they could knock. Noreen looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if I really wanted her there. I stepped aside and let them in. Maya gave me a small smile and Tony nodded hello. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before I suggested we start in the kitchen since that would be easiest. We spent the next few hours going through Dad's cabinets and drawers. Noreen found his collection of coffee mugs from different places he visited, and we laughed, remembering how he never threw any of them away, even when they got chipped. Maya discovered a drawer full of rubber bands and twist ties that Dad saved because he grew up during harder times when you didn't waste anything. Tony helped me carry boxes of dishes down from the high shelves. At one point, Noreen and I were both reaching for the same box and our hands touched. We looked at each other and for just a second, it felt like we were sisters again, instead of people on opposite sides of a legal fight. The moment passed quickly, but it happened. We found photos stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. Most of them were of me and Dad at various places over the years. There was one old photo of all four of us when Mom was still alive and Noreen and I were little girls. Noreen picked it up and stared at it for a long time. She didn't say anything, but I saw her wipe her eyes. We worked until early evening sorting things into piles. Keep, donate, throw away. It was exhausting both physically and emotionally. But we did it together as a family for the first time since the funeral. Maya was looking through Dad's garage when she found his gardening tools. She came back into the house carrying a hand trowel and some seed packets. She asked me if she could have them because she wanted to start a garden at their house to remember Grandpa. Her voice was hopeful and a little shy, like she was worried I might say no. I told her of course she could have them. I helped her gather up the rest of Dad's gardening supplies. His gloves that were worn thin in the fingers. His watering can that had a dent in the side. The kneeling pad he used because his knees hurt. Maya held each item carefully like they were precious. She said she remembered helping Grandpa plant tomatoes one summer when she was little. She said he let her dig the holes and she got dirt all over herself. I had forgotten that visit, but hearing Maya talk about it brought back the memory. Dad had been so patient with her, showing her exactly how deep to plant each seedling. We loaded everything into Maya's car. She organized the tools neatly in a box and put the seed packets in a plastic bag so they wouldn't get damaged. Watching her take such care with Dad's things made something tight in my chest loosen a little. Maybe something good really could come from all this mess. At least Maya would have real memories of her grandfather. At least she would have a connection to him that her mother had chosen to miss out on. When Maya drove away, she waved at me through the window with a real smile on her face. I waved back, thinking about Dad and hoping he somehow knew that his granddaughter was going to grow tomatoes with his tools. We finished cleaning out the house late that afternoon. The donation pile was huge and the trash pile was even bigger. I had saved several boxes of personal items for myself. Photos and papers and small things that reminded me of Dad. The last thing left was the grandmother's china set from the storage unit. I had brought it to the house earlier in the week. The china was packed in a wooden crate with each piece wrapped in newspaper. I asked Noreen to sit down at the kitchen table. Then I carried the crate over and set it in front of her. She looked confused at first. Then she realized what it was. I told her this was hers from the will, and I was giving it to her exactly like Dad wanted. Noreen started unwrapping the pieces one by one. Each plate and cup and saucer came out of the newspaper carefully. Her hands were shaking a little. When she got to the bottom of the crate, she found an envelope. Inside was a note from Dad written in his careful handwriting. The note said the china had belonged to our grandmother, who loved Noreen very much. It said grandmother always hoped Noreen would use the china for special family dinners someday. Noreen read the note twice, and then she started crying for real. Not angry crying or frustrated crying, but sad crying. She said she thought I might keep the china just to hurt her. She said she wouldn't have blamed me if I had. I told her I would never do that. Dad's wishes were clear about the china, and it had nothing to do with our conflict. The china was Noreen's, and it always had been. She carefully wrapped each piece back up and put them in the crate. Before she left, she hugged me. It was quick and awkward, but it was the first time we had hugged since before Dad died. I listed Dad's house for sale the following week. The real estate agent said the market was strong and houses in this neighborhood usually sold fast. She was right. Within 3 weeks, I had multiple offers. I accepted one from a young family with 2 kids who seemed excited about the big backyard and the garden space. The closing process took about a month. I had to sign so many papers that my hand cramped. Sitting in the title company office signing away Dad's house felt surreal. This was the place where I had spent every Sunday for 15 years. This was where I found him on the kitchen floor. This was where we had Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations. Now it belonged to strangers. The realtor walked me out after everything was done. She mentioned that the new family specifically said they wanted to keep Dad's rose bushes because they were so beautiful and well-maintained. That small detail made me feel better somehow. Dad had loved those rose bushes and spent hours taking care of them. Knowing they would stay and keep blooming made it easier to let go of the house. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while before driving away. I thought about Dad and about all the memories in that house. Then I started the engine and headed home because there was nothing left to do there. With the house sold and most of the estate settled, I finally had time to go through the boxes of Dad's personal items I had kept. I spent a whole Saturday sitting on my living room floor surrounded by papers and photos. I found old tax returns and insurance policies. I found birthday cards I had given him over the years. I found a folder of newspaper clippings about local events he thought were interesting. Then I found a small leather journal tucked in the bottom of one box. I opened it and saw Dad's handwriting filling the pages. He had been keeping a journal during the last few years of his life. I started reading and couldn't stop. He wrote about his weekly visits with me. He wrote about how much those Sundays meant to him. He wrote about feeling lonely sometimes, but also feeling loved because I showed up every week without fail. He wrote about teaching me to make his mother's soup recipe and how proud he was that I wanted to learn. He wrote about going to doctor's appointments and how grateful he was that I always came with him. Reading his words about feeling cared for made me cry. But it also made me feel good in a way I hadn't expected. The time I spent with Dad mattered. Not because of the inheritance, not because of any reward, but because it made him feel loved during the last years of his life. That was worth more than any amount of money. Our next lunch happened at the same restaurant we went to the first time. Noreen was already there when I walked in. She had ordered water for both of us and was playing with her napkin when I sat down. We ordered food and made small talk about Maya's soccer team and the weather. Then Noreen put down her menu and looked at me. She said she wanted to talk about something that had been bothering her. She said she needed to tell me about that argument with Dad 2 years ago, the one that made him change his will. I told her she didn't have to talk about it if she didn't want to. She shook her head and said she needed to say it out loud because she had never apologized to Dad, and now she couldn't. Noreen explained that she and Tony were already having money problems back then. They were behind on bills and fighting about money constantly. She had gone to see Dad hoping he might offer to help without her having to ask. But Dad started talking about his own bills and his doctor appointments and how lonely he was. Noreen said she just snapped. She told him she didn't have time to listen to him complain when she had real problems. She said old people had nothing to worry about because they were retired and just waiting around anyway. She told Dad that she was tired of pretending to care about his boring life when she was struggling to keep her own family afloat. Then she said the thing that Dad put in his letter. She said she was just waiting for him to die so she could get her inheritance and fix her life. Noreen was crying now. She said Dad's face went completely blank when she said that. He told her to leave and she did. She never went back. She never called to apologize. She convinced herself that Dad would get over it, and that family meant he would forgive her eventually. But he didn't get over it. He changed his will instead. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me was angry hearing her describe how cruel she had been to Dad. But another part of me understood that she was in pain back then, and took it out on the wrong person. I told her that what she said was horrible and unfair. I told her Dad didn't deserve to be treated like a burden when all he wanted was to spend time with his daughter. Noreen nodded and wiped her eyes. She said she knew that now. She said she thought about it every day and wished she could take it back. I told her that Dad loved her anyway. That's why he still left her the china set. He could have left her nothing, but he didn't. He wanted her to have something from our grandmother, who she was named after. I said Dad was hurt, but he wasn't hateful. Noreen asked how I could be so calm about it. She said if someone had treated me that way, I would never forgive them. I told her that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened or saying it was okay. It was about deciding not to let anger run your life. I said she needed to forgive herself even if it took time. She couldn't apologize to Dad anymore, but she could learn from what happened and be better going forward. Noreen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She thanked me for listening and for not hating her. I told her I didn't hate her. I was disappointed and hurt by a lot of things she had done, but hate was too much energy to waste on family. I spent the next week thinking about what to do with Dad's savings. The money was sitting in my bank account earning basically nothing. I needed to make a plan that felt right. I met with a financial advisor who explained different investment options. She suggested putting most of it in index funds for long-term growth and keeping some in a high-interest savings account for emergencies. That made sense for the bulk of the money. But I also wanted to use some of it in ways that would honor Dad. I thought about what mattered to him and what he would want his money to do in the world. Dad used to volunteer at the senior center on Tuesday afternoons. He would help with their computer classes and play cards with the other volunteers. He loved that place and the people there. I called the senior center and asked about making a donation. The director was excited and told me they were trying to update their computer lab, but didn't have the budget. I donated $5,000 specifically for new computers and software. They said they would put a plaque on the wall acknowledging Dad's volunteer work and the donation made in his memory. That felt good. I also remembered that Dad never went to college, but he always said education was important. He used to read the newspaper every morning and watch documentaries about history and science. He valued learning even though he didn't have much formal education himself. I researched scholarship programs at the local community college and found out I could set up a small scholarship fund with $10,000. The fund would give one student each year a $1,000 scholarship to help with tuition and books. I named it after Dad and specified that it should go to older students who were going back to the school later in life. People like Dad who valued education, but maybe didn't get the chance when they were young. The community college sent me paperwork to fill out and said the first scholarship would be awarded next fall. I imagined Dad reading about the scholarship recipient in the local paper and feeling proud that his money was helping someone learn. The rest of the savings I invested like the advisor suggested. Some in stock index funds, some in bonds, some in a high-yield savings account that I could access if I needed it. It wasn't exciting, but it was smart. Dad had been careful with money his whole life, and I wanted to respect that by not blowing through what he left me. Using the inheritance to honor his values felt more meaningful than just spending it on myself. I could have bought a new car or taken a fancy vacation, but Dad wouldn't have done those things. He would have been practical and thoughtful. He would have helped others and planned for the future. That's what I was trying to do with his money. Maya called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if she could come over to talk. She said she had a school project and needed my help. I told her to come by after dinner. She showed up with a notebook and her phone ready to record. Maya explained that her history class was doing a project on family stories. Each student had to interview a relative about their family history and what they learned from older generations. She wanted to interview me about Grandpa. I made us tea and we sat at my kitchen table. Maya turned on her phone recorder and started asking questions. She asked what Grandpa was like when I was growing up. I told her he was quiet but kind. He wasn't the type to give big speeches or show a lot of emotion, but he showed love through actions. He made sure we had what we needed. He showed up to the school events even when he was tired from work. He taught me practical things like how to change a tire and balance a checkbook. Maya wrote notes while I talked. She asked what the most important thing was that I learned from him. I thought about it for a minute. I told her that Grandpa taught me that showing up matters. He taught me that being reliable and keeping your promises is how you show people you care. Anyone can say they love you, but love is also about being there when it's hard or boring or inconvenient. Maya asked if Grandpa ever talked about his own parents or his childhood. I told her what I remembered. Grandpa's parents had immigrated here when he was a baby. They worked hard and didn't have much money. Grandpa grew up poor, but he never complained about it. He said his parents did their best and that was enough. He carried that attitude into his own life. He didn't expect things to be easy or fair. He just did what needed to be done. Maya asked about Grandpa's relationship with her mom. I paused because I didn't want to trash talk Noreen, but I also wanted to be honest. I told Maya that Grandpa loved her mom very much, but sometimes people grow apart even when they love each other. I said Grandpa was sad that Noreen didn't visit, but he understood that people make their own choices. Maya looked down at her notebook. She said she wished she had known Grandpa better. She said her mom used to say he was boring and there was no point visiting him. But now Maya realized her mom was wrong. Grandpa wasn't boring. He just lived a quiet life and valued different things than her mom did. I told Maya that it wasn't too late to know him. I said I would share more stories with her over time. I had boxes of Dad's things, including photos and letters. Maya could look through them and learn about who he really was. She smiled and said she would like that. We talked for another hour. Maya asked about Grandpa's favorite foods and hobbies. She asked what made him laugh and what made him angry. I told her everything I could remember. By the end of the interview, Maya had pages of notes and her phone was full of recorded stories. She hugged me before she left and thanked me for helping with her project. I told her she could call me anytime she wanted to talk about Grandpa or anything else. The next lunch with Noreen happened exactly 4 months after Dad's funeral. I realized that as I was driving to meet her. 4 months since I found him on the kitchen floor. 4 months since Noreen laughed at his funeral. 4 months since the will reading and everything that came after. We sat down and ordered our usual food. Noreen seemed nervous. She kept rearranging her silverware and checking her phone. Finally, she put her phone away and looked at me. She said she needed to say something and she had been practicing how to say it all week. I told her to just say it. Noreen took a deep breath. She said she was sorry for how she treated Dad. She was sorry for not visiting him and for saying cruel things to him. She was sorry for laughing at his funeral and for making his death about money instead of grief. She was sorry for attacking me when he died and for accusing me of manipulation. She said she was wrong to contest the will. She was wrong to claim I had poisoned Dad against her when the truth was she had pushed him away all by herself. Noreen said I was just being a good daughter. I showed up every week for 15 years while she couldn't be bothered to drive 40 minutes. Dad made his choice based on our actions, and his choice was fair. She said she finally understood that. The apology wasn't perfect. She stumbled over some of the words and she cried through parts of it. But it was genuine. I could tell she meant it. I sat there for a minute letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to stay angry. Part of me wanted to list all the ways she had hurt me and Dad. But I was tired of being angry. Holding on to anger wasn't serving either of us. I told Noreen I accepted her apology. I said I knew she was going through a hard time and that people make mistakes when they're desperate. I said I forgave her for the things she said and did. Noreen started crying harder. She said she didn't deserve my forgiveness. I told her that forgiveness wasn't about deserving it. It was about deciding to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past. But I also told Noreen that our relationship going forward would be different from what it was before. I said I forgave her, but that didn't mean everything went back to normal. Trust had been broken, and it would take time to rebuild. I told her I wasn't going to be the one who always reached out or tried to fix things between us. If she wanted to be part of my life, she needed to show up consistently. No. Not just when she needed something or when it was convenient. Actually show up and put in effort. Noreen nodded and said she understood. She said she knew she had a lot to prove. She said trust is earned through actions over time and not just words. She promised she would keep showing up to our monthly lunches. She promised she would call me sometimes just to check in. She promised she would make an effort to be a real sister instead of someone who only appeared when there was a crisis or money involved. I told her I appreciated that and I hoped she meant it. I said I was willing to give her a chance, but I also needed her to respect my boundaries. If I needed space or if something she did bothered me, I would tell her. And I needed her to listen instead of getting defensive. Noreen agreed. She said she was working on being better at listening and not making everything about her own feelings. We finished our lunch and split the bill like we always did. When we left the restaurant, Noreen hugged me. It lasted longer than our usual hugs. She whispered thank you in my ear before letting go. 2 weeks later, Aunt Francine called and asked if I would come to dinner at her house. She said she was inviting Noreen too and wanted us both there. Nah. It would be the first time we were at a family gathering together since the funeral. I almost said no because I wasn't sure I was ready. But Aunt Francine said it was important to her. She said family needed to be together sometimes, even when things were complicated. I agreed to come. The dinner was on a Saturday evening. I got there a little early and helped Aunt Francine set the table. Noreen arrived right on time with Tony and Maya. We all said hello, and it was awkward at first. Nobody knew quite what to say or how to act. Aunt Francine broke the tension by putting us all to work. She had Tony carve the roast. She had Maya make the salad. She had Noreen and me work together to mash the potatoes. Working side by side in the kitchen with Noreen felt strange. We used to cook together all the time when we were younger. We had a rhythm where I would peel and she would chop. We fell back into that rhythm without talking about it. Once the food was ready, we all sat down at Aunt Francine's big dining table. She said grace and thanked God for family and for second chances. We passed the food around and started eating. The conversation was careful at first. We talked about safe topics like Maya's school and Tony's job and Aunt Francine's garden. But slowly, it got more natural. Noreen told a funny story about something that happened at her work. Maya talked about her history project and how much she learned about Grandpa from interviewing me. Tony mentioned that they had met with a financial counselor and were making progress on their debt. By the end of dinner, we were all talking and even laughing a little. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and silence, but it was mostly pleasant. I realized we were slowly building a new normal, a version of family where we could be in the same room without drama or anger, where we could share a meal and talk about regular things. Maya looked happy. I caught her smiling while she watched her mom and me talking. She had been caught in the middle of our conflict and it clearly bothered her. Seeing us get along even a little bit seemed to relieve her. After dinner, Noreen helped me wash dishes while everyone else had coffee in the living room. She thanked me for coming. She said she knew it was hard and she appreciated that I was trying. I told her I was trying because of Maya and Aunt Francine. They deserved to have family gatherings that weren't full of fighting and tension. Noreen said she was trying for the same reasons. We finished the dishes and joined everyone else. I left feeling cautiously hopeful. Maybe we really could find a way to be family again, even if it looked different from before. The following week, I met with Jung to make the final legal filings to close Dad's estate completely. Everything had been settled. The house was sold. The will contest was withdrawn. All the assets were distributed according to Dad's wishes. Jung prepared the final documents and I signed them at his office. He congratulated me on navigating a difficult situation with grace and strength. Jung said he had handled a lot of will contests over the years, and many of them destroyed families permanently. Siblings who stopped speaking, children who cut off their parents, relatives who spent years in bitter legal battles that cost more in lawyer fees than the estate was worth. He said it was rare to see people find a way to move forward like Noreen and I had. I told him it wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect. Our relationship would never be what it was before. But we found a way to be in each other's lives without constant conflict. Jung said that was all anyone could ask for. He said doing the right thing sometimes means standing firm on boundaries. I had honored Dad's wishes and protected the inheritance he meant for me. But I also showed compassion when I could, and left the door open for reconciliation. That took strength. I thanked Jung for all his help. I told him I couldn't have gotten through the legal battle without his guidance. He had helped me understand that I didn't have to give in to pressure just to keep the peace. Sometimes peace comes from standing your ground and letting other people adjust. We shook hands, and I left his office with the final estate documents in my bag. Dad's estate was officially closed. Everything was done. I walk past Dad's house sometimes, even though someone else lives there now. The new family keeps the rose bushes trimmed and the lawn looks good. I don't stop or knock on the door, but I drive by when I'm in the neighborhood, and it makes me feel like Dad's still connected to this place somehow. The inheritance money sits in my bank account, and I've been careful with it just like Dad would want. I paid off my car and put most of the rest in investments that will grow slowly over time. I kept enough to feel secure and to know I can handle emergencies without panic. That security feels like Dad's arms around me even though he's gone. Sometimes I take out the photos I saved from his house and look at them when I'm having a hard day. There's one of him in his garden holding tomatoes he grew himself and smiling because he was proud of how big they got that year. I tell him about my life now, like he can hear me, and maybe he can, or maybe talking to his photo just helps me feel less alone. 6 months feels like forever, and also like yesterday. The sharp pain of losing him has faded into something softer that I carry with me instead of something that knocks me down. I can think about Dad without crying every time now, and I can remember the good parts without the grief swallowing everything else. Noreen and I have lunch next week, and I'm not dreading it, which feels like progress. We're building something new that's not the same as what we had before, but it's real, and it's ours. Noreen calls me on Tuesday and asks if we can meet somewhere quiet because she wants to talk about something important. My stomach drops because I immediately think she's going to ask for more money or bring up the will again. But her voice sounds different, calmer, less angry. I agree to meet her at a park near where we grew up because it's neutral ground and there are benches where we can sit. When I get there, she's already waiting with 2 coffees from the place we used to go to as teenagers. She hands me one and we walk toward the old playground that's been updated since we played here, but still has the same basic layout. We sit on a bench and don't talk for a minute because neither of us knows how to start this conversation. Finally, Noreen says she's been thinking a lot about our family and about how different our experiences were growing up in the same house with the same parents. I wait because I can tell she has more to say. She explains that she always felt like I was Dad's favorite because I was responsible and easy, and I did everything right. She says she felt like the disappointment who could never measure up no matter what she did. I listen without interrupting because this is the most honest Noreen has been with me in years. She says that feeling like the less loved daughter made her angry, and she took that anger out on Dad by staying away and convincing herself he didn't care if she visited or not. It's my turn to talk, so I tell her how lonely it was being the responsible one who always had to take care of things. I explain that I didn't get to be messy or make mistakes because someone had to be reliable, and that someone was always me. I tell her that Dad loved both of us, but he showed love through needing people, and I was the one who let myself be needed while she pulled away. Noreen nods and says she understands that now, but she didn't see it that way before. We sit quietly for a while watching kids play on the swings. Then she says something that surprises me. She says she's not mad about the will anymore because she realizes Dad was right to give the estate to me. She says I earned it by showing up and she didn't, and that's just the truth even if it hurts. I tell her that neither of us had it completely right or completely wrong about our family. We both saw Dad through our own lenses shaped by our own insecurities and needs. She agrees and says maybe that's true for all families, and nobody gets the full picture of anyone else. We finish our coffee and hug before we leave, and it feels different from our awkward hugs at previous lunches. This one feels real. Aunt Francine hosts Thanksgiving dinner and invites both Noreen and me along with Tony and Maya. I almost say no because holidays are hard without Dad, and being around family makes his absence more obvious. But Maya texts me asking if I'm coming and saying she hopes I will, so I agree to go. When I arrive, Noreen is already there helping Aunt Francine in the kitchen. She waves at me and smiles, and it looks genuine instead of forced. Tony shakes my hand and thanks me again for helping them when they needed it. Maya hugs me and shows me photos of her garden, which has grown bigger since the last time she sent pictures. The tomatoes from Dad's seeds did really well, and she's planning to expand the garden next spring. We all sit down to eat, and Aunt Francine asks if anyone wants to say grace. There's an awkward silence because we're all thinking about Dad, who used to say grace at every family meal. Then Noreen speaks up. She says she'd like to propose a toast instead if that's okay. Everyone picks up their glasses and waits. Noreen looks at me and her eyes are wet, but she's not crying. She says she wants to toast Dad and thank me publicly for being the daughter who was there for him when he needed someone. She says I gave him 15 years of Sundays and doctor's appointments and companionship, and that meant everything. She says she wishes she had been there too, but she wasn't, and she has to live with that. I feel tears running down my face because I didn't expect this. Noreen raises her glass higher and everyone else follows. I raise mine too, even though my hand is shaking. I add that Dad loved both of us in his own way, and we're honoring him by finding our way back to being family, even if it looks different from before. Tony says he'll drink to that, and we all clink glasses. Maya is smiling so big, and I realize how much our fighting must have hurt her. We eat dinner and the conversation flows naturally. We talk about Maya's school and Tony's new job and Aunt Francine's plans to travel next year. We tell stories about Dad that make us laugh instead of cry. Noreen mentions the time Dad tried to fix the sink himself and flooded the basement. I remember the time he got lost driving to my apartment even though he'd been there 100 times before. We're sharing memories and building something together instead of tearing each other apart over money and resentment. After dinner, Noreen helps me wash dishes, and we work side by side without talking much, but it's comfortable. When I leave that night, I feel lighter than I have in months. I keep Dad's photo on my desk at work where I can see it when I look up from my computer. It's the one of him in his garden holding those tomatoes and smiling. Sometimes I tell him about my day out loud when I'm alone in my office. I tell him about the project I finished or the difficult conversation I had with my boss or the funny thing that happened at lunch. I don't know if he can hear me, but it makes me feel connected to him anyway. The inheritance gave me financial security that I never had before. I can pay my bills without stress, and I have savings for emergencies, and I can make choices based on what I want instead of what I can afford. But the real gift wasn't the money. It was Dad's validation of the choice I made to show up for him week after week for 15 years. His will and his letter told me that my time and care mattered, that being there when someone needs you is worth more than being there when it's convenient. That love is a verb and not just a feeling. Our family isn't perfect or fully healed. Noreen and I will never be as close as we were when we were kids. Too much has happened and we're too different now. But we're moving forward with honesty and realistic expectations about what we can be to each other. We have lunch once a month and we show up for family gatherings and we're kind to each other. That's enough. I did right by Dad, and I also showed compassion to Noreen when I could. I stood firm on boundaries when I needed to, and I extended grace when it was possible. I'm at peace with how everything unfolded because I know I made choices I can live with. Some nights I still miss Dad so much it hurts, but mostly I feel grateful for the time we had and the lessons he taught me about love and loyalty and doing what's right even when it's hard.